Do you believe in God? She asked me. Yes, I do. I know He's real, I said confidently. The expression on her face was one of questioning surprise. How do you know that? Because of things that have happened to me that could only be explained by the existence of God, I told her. I looked at her and she still seemed skeptical. Carrie, my employee, was a college student that works for me. She must be taking a class that has caused her to question God's existence. What has happened to you to give you this assurance? She asked. That is kind of a long story. How about we talk about it some other time when we don't have customers to wait on? I said. How about tonight after we close? She proposed. Fine, but it wouldn't look right for you and me to be staying after just the two of us, so if you can get one of the others to stay and listen to my story, I'll tell you. I was hoping that no one else would want to stay. The story still caused me some emotional turmoil. I'm sure Kim would be glad to stay. I'll talk to her, she said as she turned to go. My name is Kurt Bergen. I'm a manager of an Outback steakhouse. Carrie and Kim are waitresses that work for me. I hope that if I have to tell my story they don't tell anyone else, or worse, start to look at me with pity. I am in my office finishing up my reports on the computer when in walk Carrie and Kim. These two are best friends, have been since grade school. They are both attending the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We're all done. Do you want to check out our work? They asked. Sure, I said, hoping that after I check, to see if their tables, floors, table sets, and waitress station are clean and orderly, they will just leave. Everything looked great as I expected. They are very conscientious employees. Looks great, girls, go ahead and take off. I say. Oh no, we're waiting until you get done. How much longer? Carrie asks. About 20 minutes, you don't have to stay. I can close up all by myself. You said you would tell us your story. Don't be trying to weasel out of it now, Carrie declared. Okay, let me finish up, I said as I walked through the kitchen area to see how my cook and dishwasher were doing. Looking good, guys, how much longer? We'll be out of here in 15 minutes, boss. My dishwasher said. He always called me boss. He didn't seem to mean it derogatorily though. Just an expression for someone that employed him. I walked back to my office and the girls were sitting there waiting. I sat down and made light conversation as I worked on the computer. In 15 minutes my cook and dishwasher stepped in the door and said, "We're ready to be checked out." Guys, it looked good when I walked through. I'm sure it looks great now. Thanks, go ahead and take off. Showing confidence in their ability to do a good job without my checking again was one way I showed my trust and appreciation for all their hard work. You girls leaving too? Gary the cook asked. No, Kurt is going to finish up and then he's going to tell us how he knows there is a God. Gary looked at me quizzically. It's a long story and I told Carrie and Kim that I would tell them after work. I said. Well, can we hear it too? Jack the dishwasher said. Sure, if you want to, but I'd like the story to stay just between us. Will you agree to that? Of course. They all said. I finished my reports, shut down my computer, stood up and said. Let's lock up and hit Ramos Pizza, I'm buying. Great. They all said. At Ramos we grabbed a large table and ordered 2 large pizzas with pop, as they say it in Nebraska. Then I started my tale. As you can guess by my accent, I'm not from Nebraska, I'm originally from Jefferson, Georgia. It's about an hour northeast of Atlanta. It's a small town of only about 10,000 people. I knew you were from down south, I could tell. Said Jack, what brought you here? Well, that's the subject of my story. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the 4th of 5 siblings. We were never rich, we weren't dirt poor, but there were more than a few times we had pancakes for supper because the budget was tight. My mom and dad were always arguing about something, mostly money. To get away from it, I started running. By the time I was in high school, I was the fastest cross-country runner in my school. I liked to run and it kept me out of the line of fire at home. By my senior year I had run 2 marathons, also by my senior year I had a steady girlfriend, her name was Jessica Bell Purdy. I loved her. I had to pause there and I thought about that beautiful girl. Those memories were good ones. I don't know if I've ever told anyone that I had been married before coming to Nebraska. Really? I didn't know that. Carrie stated. As I looked around at the other faces I could tell no one knew. Jessica Bell, everyone called her Bell, she kinda insisted on it, but after we were going out for a while she let me call her Jessie. She was beautiful in a natural kind of way. She didn't have to wear makeup, to me it would have covered up perfection. She wasn't a runway model, more of a girl next door beauty. It was 9th grade, first day of English class, she walked in and I was love-struck. I just watched her take a seat, I must have looked like an idiot. When the teacher started taking roll and called out her name, Jessica Purdy, she confidently said, "I go by Belle." Wow, I thought, of course she goes by Belle, she's a Southern belle. She was way out of my league. It took almost half the semester to get up enough courage to even talk to her. When I did, she said jokingly, "I was beginning to think you had a mental block and couldn't talk to girls. I did think I had seen you talk to Mary though." "Sorry, I guess I didn't know what to say," I said sheepishly. "So, Kurt, what can I do for you?" she said with confidence. "I was wondering if you could help me with English. I know you're getting an A and I am barely getting a C." I asked. "Sure, if you can do something for me," she said. I looked up at her face. "Anything, just name it," I said. "I'm having trouble in biology class. Can you help me with that?" "Sure." We worked out a schedule where on Tuesdays I got tutored in English and on Thursdays she got tutored in biology. By the end of the semester we were good friends. One day before Christmas break she asked me whether my church has services on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. "We don't go to church," I said apologetically. "Well, would you like to come to a Christmas Eve service at my church?" I don't know. I've never been to church and I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know when to stand, sit, or kneel. I might embarrass you," I said ashamedly. Right then Kim interrupted my story. "You had never been to church? I thought everyone went to church in the South. Isn't it called the Bible Belt?" "Well, my dad was anti-church. All they want is your money, he always said." "So did you go?" Gary asked. I thought about it. I would get out of our house for a night and get to spend more time with her in the process. It might give me more insight into who this Southern belle was. So, of course I went. I didn't understand a lot about it. Of course, I had heard about baby Jesus before, but the preacher mostly talked about the Lamb of God. I had seen the nativity scenes and knew there were cows and sheep, but I didn't understand what he was talking about. I had many questions for Jessie after we got out of the service. She said, "Come to youth group with me this Sunday night and maybe some of your questions will be answered." Well, I did, and Sunday morning service the next week, and continued to go. Finally, I really understood, and on a mission trip that next summer I met God. Our mission trip was to a very poor area in the hills of Kentucky. These people made my family look rich. What struck me was although they were dirt poor they smiled, had great attitudes and were sincerely happy. They knew God would provide for them. "So that is how you know there is a God?" Carrie interrupted. "No, that comes much later. Don't get me wrong, I knew and felt him in my life on that mission trip. In fact, I asked him into my heart that week. The things that cemented it in my mind came years later. Let me continue my story," I said. Well, Jessie and I became an item. We were active in church and youth group and were together almost all the time. I was happier than I had ever been and probably ever will be. All through high school we were a couple. We had our disagreements, but we never broke up. We also pledged to each other to stay pure until our wedding day. Don't get me wrong, we weren't angels. We were, after all, teenagers with teenager hormones. We experimented but never went all the way. I paused as my mind drifted back to all the things we did. We were in my car, we had started with just necking but it became quite intense. My hands were roaming all over her chest, above the shirt at first of course, but then I slipped my hand up the bottom of her blouse. Her skin was so soft and warm. When I felt her bra, I started caressing her. She didn't stop me, but I could tell she was a little nervous. I stopped kissing her, pulled back and looked into her eyes. "Jessie, I love you, I won't do anything you don't want me to do." "I love you too, Kurt. I just want my wedding night to be special, something I'll remember forever. I want it to be my first time. I understand, and although I'm eager to make love to you, I will wait as long as you want. In fact, I pledge to you that we will wait until we get married, no matter how long that takes." I promised. She then did something that amazed me. I wasn't sure what she was doing, but soon her bra was being pulled out one of her blouse sleeves. I was excited. I knew that beneath that blouse were two bare breasts. I needed to touch them. I pulled her head in and started kissing her passionately, maybe even a little more than just passionately. I put my hand back under her blouse and caressed my way up. I felt the soft underside of her breast. She moaned into my lips. I was in heaven. I know that sounds stupid, but it was the first time for me to feel a woman's breast. I massaged her breast and started tweaking her nipple. I stopped kissing her, pushed her blouse up over her breast, moved my mouth down and started sucking on her nipple. My hormones were raging. I was so hard. Jessie let me continue. In fact, she was enjoying it. The next few months were filled with experimentation. She would give me hand jobs while I pleasured her with my fingers. I started licking her clit. She grabbed my hair and pushed my face into her. She started to spasm in orgasm. I felt great knowing that I could please her in that way. In the next year, we were spending a lot of time getting to know each other's bodies. The next 2 years were filled with more of the same as we got closer intellectually and emotionally as well as physically. "So, what happened?" Kim asked, bringing me back to the present. "Sorry, lost in thought." I said. "Let me continue. In my senior year, I got a job at the Outback Steakhouse in Commerce, Georgia. I started as a dishwasher," I said and looked at Jack. "After a while I became a cook," I said, looking at Gary. "By the time I was 21 I was an assistant manager. That's when I asked Jessie to marry me. In the spring of 2009 we got married. We went to Miami for our honeymoon, but we didn't see much of the beach, we didn't see much of anything but the inside of our hotel room." My mind wandered again, remembering our first time and the week that followed. The night of our wedding we were both nervous. We were anxious for our first time, but even though we knew each other's bodies, it would be a new experience. We were tired, but I had to have what I hadn't had before. We were both excited and ready to do this. I was hard and she was wet. She got into bed and I got on top of her. I went slowly. She encouraged me by telling me she loved me and how she enjoyed the feeling of me entering her. As I hit her hymen she tensed. I looked into her eyes and said, "I love you, Jessie. I want to grow old with you." "Well, you'd better, we're married now. I'm Mrs. Kurt Bergen for the rest of my life." I pushed into her. I could tell it hurt her, but she looked at me with love in her eyes. After just a few strokes we were going at it like bunnies. It felt so good, soft, wet, and warm. The rest of the honeymoon was more of us loving each other and experimenting with what we had held sacred for our wedding night. At one point we tried something that we had heard about but obviously never tried. We tried anal. I could see the pain on her face as I entered her, even though both she and I were lubed excessively. I decided then that unless she insisted I do it again, that I would not push her into it again. I wanted every time we made love to each other to be an enjoyable and loving experience. I wanted her to feel only love and giving, never pain or selfishness. When we made it back home we were eager to get an apartment and start our life together. The pizza had arrived as I had been reminiscing, and I continued my story as we ate. I loved being with her. We tried to work out our schedules so that we had at least one day off together. She was working at the Gap in the Tanger Outlet Mall close to where I worked. We would spend as much time together as possible. I got out of work after the dinner rush on Saturday nights. She wanted to go out every Saturday night. We made it to church the first few months, but after a while she wanted to sleep in and explore each other on Sunday mornings. Soon we were only going to church about once a month. We did definitely make it to Christmas and Easter services though. Obviously, I had to be at work on Sundays. I had a great assistant manager that opened for me. This allowed me to come in at 11:30, exhausted of course. We both had off on Tuesdays. Wednesday was a long day as you know because we do inventory on Wednesday nights. That worked out pretty well because she closed on Wednesdays and they did inventory also. Theirs didn't take as long though, so she would wait for me. After a while she was promoted to assistant manager also, and we were both happy at our good fortune. Now we could save a little more money toward our down payment on a house. Soon I got promoted to restaurant manager. 23 years old and I was a manager. I was so happy. Life seemed to be going our way. In no time at all we would be able to buy a house and start our family. A while later Jessie came into the restaurant all excited. She was being promoted to store manager. She would have to change store locations though. She would be working at the Mall of Georgia. We still lived in Jefferson, so she would be commuting about 35 to 40 minutes in one direction and I would still be commuting 20 minutes in another. I think that was the beginning of the end, but I didn't know it at the time. When she started she was so happy, but also I could tell she was feeling the pressure of managing a store. I knew what she was going through. I had felt the pressure too when I first got promoted. After about a month of managing she started to change. She started wearing makeup. She told me her district manager, a woman, suggested she spruce herself up a bit. I didn't think she needed it, but if it made her district manager happy then I was okay with it. I had to make my own changes when I was promoted. We were still enjoying our life together. Our love life was great. We bonded for hours every Tuesday and had a shorter session on Thursday night after work every week. We also had quickies whenever we could find the time. After she was a manager for about a month she came home and told me that her inventory night was going to be changed to Thursday night, so she would be home late from now on. No more Thursday night lovemaking. We still made love passionately on Tuesdays and quickies whenever we could work it out. My days off were Mondays and Tuesdays. That was my weekend. Unfortunately, that is the norm for restaurant work. On Mondays I ran errands, made appointments, and since Jessie was working, I relaxed and made Mondays my day. I would go to lunch almost every week for Chinese. Let me tell you something I found is funny. When I was a teenager my friends and I would get Chinese food and laugh when we read our fortunes. The fortunes weren't necessarily funny, but we added in bed at the end of all of them. It was hilarious how that changed the fortunes. For example, your energy is contagious, in bed. Or you will make a big impression on someone, in bed. It became quite the joke for us. When I had Chinese for lunch I would read my fortunes and laugh out loud in the restaurant. I would get strange looks and often would be asked, "What's so funny?" I would explain and some of the people would laugh along with me. Well, one Monday I got a fortune that read, "Your most trusted is untrustworthy." I laughed, but only quietly. Jessie was my most trusted. That can't be right. Again, I laughed at the fortunes, so I didn't put much faith in them. The next Monday I had Chinese again. I opened my fortune cookie and again the fortune was, "Your most trusted is untrustworthy." I had had a fortune come around more than once, so it wasn't too unusual to get a repeat fortune, but this was the first time it happened back to back. It made me a little apprehensive. That night when Jessie got home I looked for anything that would make me think that she might not be trustworthy. I saw nothing. In fact, our quickie that night was full of passion. The next day we made love for hours. It was passionate. There was no way she could be unfaithful to me. The next Monday I got Chinese again and again the same fortune, "Your most trusted is untrustworthy." Was Jessie cheating on me? Was she untrustworthy, in bed? I had a doctor's appointment that afternoon. I was sitting in the waiting room, my mind on my marriage. The fortunes were really getting to me. 3 weeks in a row, the same fortune, could that be a coincidence? I was staring at the low table in front of me, not really looking. Like most waiting rooms, there were magazines on the table. The top magazine had the name Jessica big in bold. The bottom of the magazine was covered by another magazine. Under the Jessica magazine was another magazine only partially visible, but the words that lined up with her name were "is cheating on you." I stared at it, my heart pounding, my breath getting faster and faster. I picked up the first magazine. It had an article about Jessica Alba. Underneath was a Cosmopolitan with an article titled, "How to Tell If He Is Cheating on You." I knew this couldn't be a coincidence. God was telling me something big. That night I couldn't connect with Jessie. I asked her if everything was okay with her. She said, "Yes baby, everything is great. I'm loving my new position in the store in the mall." I never knew how fulfilling it could be. We went to bed and I went through the motions, my mind not into it. Tuesday was a little off. We made love but I still wasn't connecting with Jessie. Wednesday was inventory. That took my mind off of the situation a little. I got home at about midnight and went right to bed. Jessie was already asleep. Thursday, my mind was not on my work. Luckily my assistant manager took up the slack. He was definitely ready for his own restaurant. I could see him getting promoted to his own restaurant real soon. At about 5 o'clock I told him I wasn't feeling well. He said, "Go home, I'll cover for you." I left, but I didn't go home. I drove straight to the Mall of Georgia. I needed to talk to Jessie before she started her inventory. I needed to tell her of my fears. I needed to have her calm those fears. When I was about 5 minutes away I called the store to see if she could grab dinner with me. Her assistant manager answered the phone. I asked her if I could talk to Belle. She just left. "Oh, did she go to grab something for dinner?" I asked. "No, she left for the day." "Doesn't she have to do inventory tonight?" I asked. "No, we do inventory on Wednesdays." My heart sank. Jessie had lied to me so she could stay out late on Thursday nights. I pulled into the parking lot near the entrance located by the Gap. I saw her car. She hadn't left yet. I looked for her and then I saw her. She was walking arm in arm with a man. No, not a man, he looked like a teenager, maybe 18 or 19. He was black, about 6 inches taller than her. She looked up at him and laughed. Then she stopped and kissed him. Her white face made up with bright red lipstick was kissing this black teenager. The look on her face told me everything. She was with him every Thursday night, instead of being home with me. I parked and watched them kiss again before they got in his car. It was a passionate, lustful kiss. I left the parking lot and drove to our apartment. It was over. God had shown me through the fortunes and the magazines. My Jessie was cheating on me. She was being untrustworthy in bed. I packed a suitcase, grabbed my toiletries, and left my ring on the bathroom vanity. As I said before, I am a runner, and that's what I did. I took the limit of $300 out of the ATM and drove. I spent the first night in Nashville. I had turned off my phone, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I turned it on in the morning and had 10 voicemails, I didn't listen to any of them. I did read the first text though. "Kurt, where are you? Call me." I didn't. I did however call my district manager and told him a little about what was going on. Then I told him that I hated to leave without a notice but I would not be back. I recommended that my assistant manager be promoted, he was fully capable. I apologized again and then hung up. I shut my phone back off and drove to Jefferson City, Missouri and stayed there that night. I turned my phone back on the next morning, there were 15 more voicemails and 20 new text messages. I didn't read or listen to any of them. I called my assistant manager, apologized and wished him well. Then I drove here to Lincoln, Nebraska and have been here ever since. That was 6 years ago. Wow, what a bitch. Carrie said. I believe God told me, in an unusual way, that she was cheating on me. How else could you explain it? That is why I know that God is real. Wow, did you ever talk to her? Gary asked. No, but I did get a certified letter in the mail here at work about 2 months later. In the letter, she told me she was pregnant and that I was going to be a father. I thought this was a lame attempt to get me back. She was on the pill. We had planned on her stopping taking the pill when we bought our first house. I sent her a certified letter back and told her that I didn't believe her. If, in fact, she was pregnant, I would want DNA results once the baby was born to prove it was my baby. If it was, then I would pay child support. If not, then I didn't want to see her ever again. The rest of her letter was full of apologies and professions of her love for me. I didn't want to hear any of it. If she loved me, she wouldn't have been cheating on me for months. Jessica Bell. Do you believe in God? She asked me. Yes, I do. I know He's real, I said confidently. The expression on her face was one of questioning surprise. How do you know that? Because of things that have happened to me that could only be explained by the existence of God. I told her. I looked at her and she still seemed skeptical. Deuteronomy 32 verse 35, I said, vengeance is mine. I will repay. In due time their foot will slip, for the day of disaster is near, and their doom is coming quickly. What happened? Sheila, my downstairs neighbor, asked. It's a long story, but if you want to hear it, I'll tell you. Sure, she said, just a hint of interest in her voice. I was married to my high school sweetheart, the love of my life. Then I went and fucked it up, literally. My husband, Kurt, now my ex-husband unfortunately, was a loving man. I loved him. We met in high school. We were together since the 9th grade. In our senior year he got a job at Outback Steakhouse and I got a job at The Gap. Kurt is a great guy and a hard worker. It wasn't long before he got promoted to assistant manager. A little while later I got promoted also. We were happy, we got married and started making plans for our future. When he was 23 years old he got promoted to restaurant manager. I was so happy for him. We started making plans to buy a house and start our family. You know, before we met Kurt never believed in God. He hardly knew anything about Him at all. I brought him to church, youth group, missions, everything. He found God and believed, I think he still does. We loved each other deeply. Our schedules were such that we spent every Saturday night going out drinking and dancing or partying with friends. I talked him into skipping church so we could spend the morning sleeping in and then making love. Also, we each had Tuesdays off. We spent all day sharing and showing our love for each other. We tried everything and anything in bed. My mind wandered as I remembered the time we spent together, from our honeymoon to our regular every Tuesday lovemaking. We spent hours together in passion, showing our love to each other. I loved the way I felt when Kurt touched me, loved me, cared for me. I enjoyed giving him pleasure as much as he enjoyed giving me pleasure. Oh, how I missed Kurt. How I missed our lovemaking and the feeling of security I felt when I was with him. God, what had I done? Why had I done it? I don't deserve Kurt. I hope he finds someone that could love him the way he deserved. He deserved a faithful wife, one that wasn't stupid enough to throw it all away for a stupid fling, a stupid taboo fling. I thought to myself. I looked at my neighbor. She was waiting for me to continue. One day my manager, Judy, came to me and told me to go into the office. I walked back, confused. When I walked in, the district manager was sitting at the desk. Belle, she said, you've been doing an excellent job here as assistant manager. I feel you are ready to manage your own store. How do you feel about that? I'm excited, apprehensive, but excited. I think I can do a good job continuing what Judy has created here. Belle, you wouldn't be at this store. Rather, I need you at the store in the Mall of Georgia. Would you want to do that? Yes, I would. I said, I do feel I would need your guidance as I get used to the people in the store, but yes, I would. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the moment that would change my life forever. I told my neighbor. At the end of the day, I went over to Outback Steakhouse and gave the news to Kurt. He was so happy for me. I was happy for us. Our dreams would come that much sooner, or at least that is what I thought at the time. At the new store, the routines were about the same. paperwork, deposits, and inventory on Wednesday evenings. Even with inventory and being about 40 minutes away, I was still home before Kurt. Other managers from the mall stores came and introduced themselves to me. I was enjoying the camaraderie. I was invited to go out for a drink after work one night. Thursday, a bunch of us from the mall go to the Twisted Tavern, grab a drink, and get to know each other. I begged off that week, but I really wanted to go. The next week I went for one drink and left after a half an hour. On the drive home, I thought that I would really like to spend more time with these people on Thursdays. That is when I made a plan. I hate to admit it, but I lied to Kurt. He wouldn't understand my wanting to go out with others instead of coming home to him on Thursday nights. I told Kurt that they were changing inventory night to Thursdays so I would be able to stay later on those nights. The next Thursday I had one drink and talked and listened to all the gossip. There were employees as well as managers. There must have been about 30 of us. One of the guys kept looking at me. He was cute, tall, dark-skinned, and handsome. He must have been about 19 or maybe 20. He came up to me and said, "Hey baby, do you want to dance? Maybe another time." I said, I don't know what I was thinking. I was married. He was black, that was taboo, at least for a Southern belle from a small town in Georgia. It's not like I had never talked to black people, but I had never danced with one. My family was old-fashioned, and yes, probably a little prejudiced. That night on the way home I thought about it. Was I a bigot? He had just asked for a dance. Next week, if he asked, I would say yes. I got back to our apartment and felt guilty for lying to Kurt about having to work. I took him to bed and we screwed for an hour. All week long I kept thinking about the black guy. I saw him working at American Eagle Outfitters. On Tuesday I made love to Kurt. My mind wasn't fully on it though. I kept thinking about dancing with the tall, dark, and handsome guy on Thursday. On Thursday I dressed up a bit and put on makeup. He noticed and asked me to dance. It was a fast song so I told him, sure. As the song ended, a slow song came on and he pulled me to him to continue to dance. I was so nervous. I danced the dance, then went back to the table and sat there the rest of the night. I went home and screwed my husband, but I was thinking about Jerome. Well, every Thursday we got closer and closer. Then one night, early in the evening, he said, "Let's get out of here." I don't know why or what I was thinking, but I did. We started necking in the back of his car and he started feeling me up outside my clothes. When he put his hand down to my crotch, I stopped him and told him I had to go. I got out of his car and ran to my car. I hopped in and drove off. I couldn't go home yet though. Kurt would wonder why I was home early on inventory night. I drove around and thought about what I was doing. I had to stop going out on Thursday nights, but how would I explain that to Kurt? It had only been a couple months. He wouldn't believe they would change inventory night for only 2 months. I finally went home at about the usual time. When Kurt started to get frisky, I told him I wasn't feeling up to it and turned over to go to sleep. I had to fake sleep, it wouldn't come, my mind was racing a mile a minute. At 12:30 I got up, got a glass of milk and went back to bed. Finally sleep came. All week long my mind was on what happened and what might happen in the future. On Thursday I promised myself that I wouldn't do anything with Jerome. I had to tell him again that I was married and nothing could happen. When I went out to the bar I was expecting him to hit on me again. Just the opposite happened. He didn't even say hello. That pissed me off. What? I wouldn't put out for him, so he was going to ignore me now. I made a conscious effort to dance with all the guys except him. That would serve him right. That night I went home and fucked my husband. I wore him out and he loved it. I couldn't tell him why, that I was mad for being ignored. The next Thursday I was dressed to the nines. I brought a little black dress and 4-inch heels to work and put them on when I left work. When he saw me his eyes almost popped out of his head. He didn't ignore me then. Again, we left early and when we got into the back seat of his car I was all over him. I let him feel me up. He said, "Don't tease me, bitch, you know what I want." I want it too, give it to me, I said breathlessly. That night I went home with a smile on my face. I was the victor. He couldn't ignore me that night. As I drove into the apartment complex, it hit me what I had done. All the way home I was thinking of the triumph I had over Jerome. Now it hit me, it was the defeat of my marriage. I jumped into the shower and cried. If Kurt came into the bathroom, he wouldn't be able to tell I was crying. My tears were just a small portion of the water going down the drain. I begged off sex with Kurt again, telling him I was too tired. I had to get a hold of myself. I couldn't let Kurt know what I had done, he would never forgive me. Saturday night we partied hard and I took Kurt right on the floor as we entered the apartment. He hardly had time to close the door. Sunday morning found me on top of him writing for all it was worth. He left for work with a huge smile on his face. I sat at home reliving the ecstasy of Thursday night and also the shame of the guilt fuck I had given my husband. Thursday Jerome was expecting to go out again. I told him again I was married. That's alright with me, babe. I'm not looking for a commitment. You have to admit it was terrific last week. He can have you all week, I just want a couple hours on Thursday night. I knew it was wrong, dead wrong, but I did it again. For the next month we went out right from work. I gave Kurt my all the other days of the week, but Thursdays were for Jerome. Then it happened. I came home on a Thursday night and the apartment felt different. Kurt was not there. I called his name, but no answered. I called his phone, no answer. I looked out into the parking lot and didn't see his car. I knocked on our neighbor's door and asked if they had seen Kurt. No, but we just got home about an hour ago, they said. I called the restaurant. Mike, the assistant manager, told me he left early, said he wasn't feeling good. I tried his phone again no answer. If he hadn't felt good and went to the hospital, he would have to have his phone off. I had to go see if he was there. I had to take a shower first though, I wanted to be fresh for him if he wasn't feeling good. I didn't want him smelling me all sweaty from my night of sin. I ran into the bathroom pulling my clothes off as I did. I unzipped my pants and started bending over to pull them off. My face came about level with the vanity top. That's when I saw it, right where his shaving cream usually sat, his wedding ring. My eyes got wide, then my heart dropped. I knew then my life was over. I called Kurt again no answer. I left a message begging him to call me, I needed to explain. How could I explain? I was a lying, cheating slut. I called his parents' house in a vain hope that he might be there. He wasn't on the best of terms with his parents. His childhood was full of them fighting all the time. He had just wanted to get out of there as soon as he was able. I was right, they hadn't seen or heard from him in months. I kept trying his phone, leaving message after message, no response. Friday morning I called in sick to work. I was distraught, my stomach in knots. I threw up twice. I also called his work. The girl said he wasn't there, he had called in. He didn't come home Friday night. I resigned myself to go to work Saturday and be home when he got home from work. I needed to talk to him. Saturday he didn't come home either. I called everyone I knew asking if they had seen him or talked to him. Everyone said no. Then I called the police. They told me I had to wait at least 72 hours before I could file a missing persons report. Sunday, I went by his work, they told me he had called in and quit. Mike said he was worried. It was not like Kurt to just quit like that. So, I went down to the police station and filed my report. Weeks went by with no word. I was a basket case. I definitely wasn't going out on Thursday nights and didn't want to talk to Jerome. I was sick all the time, I hardly ate. I couldn't keep anything down. My district manager came in and told me I looked like hell. She told me I needed to go to the doctor because something was wrong with me. I knew what was wrong, I was a lying, cheating slut and was depressed because I lost my husband, my love, my life, my future. The doctor ran tests and came back with a surprise. I was pregnant. How could that be? I was on the pill until we purchased a house, then we would start a family. She told me that the pill wasn't 100%, I could have too low a dosage for my body as it went through the changes that occur in the 20s. I thought about it. This could be my answer. Kurt would come back and forgive me if he knew he had a baby to raise. I had to find him and let him know. I had a guy at social services try to find the deadbeat, as he called him. He ran his social security number. If he was getting paid, other than under the table, it would show up. He was in Lincoln, Nebraska, working at another Outback steakhouse. I didn't have time available or the money to fly to Nebraska, so I sent a certified letter to the restaurant. I had tried calling, but they didn't allow personal phone calls, and Kurt didn't have a wife. That hit me hard. He had disowned me. A week later, I got a letter in the mail from Kurt. He said he didn't believe me that I was pregnant. He knew I was on birth control. Anyways, even if I was, he didn't know if it was his. He'd wait to see what color it was when it came out, and then, if it was white, we would do a DNA test. That hurt me bad. I knew that this baby was a product of our love, not the result of my lust. It had to be, just the odds would say it was. 4 or 5 times a week I made love to Kurt versus 1 time a week getting fucked by Jerome. Well, my parents were only somewhat supportive. They knew why Kurt had left. I had to tell them. When the baby arrived, it was a mulatto baby. I was heartbroken. God had continued his revenge on me. I didn't even bother calling or writing to Kurt to tell him. My parents all but disowned me. I could see the disappointment on their faces. Now I had a baby boy, Jacob, to take care of and no one willing to help me. I couldn't keep my job, my heart was not in it. When I told Jerome, he would have nothing to do with me or the baby. When I showed Jacob to him, he went as far as to say, "How do I know it's mine?" That hurt. Whenever I walked the baby in the stroller, people would smile at me and want to look at the baby. 9 times out of 10, their smile would quickly fade when they saw him. He was not ugly, just not what people expected or wanted to see. I applied for welfare and got an apartment that accepted Section 8. I had moved closer to Atlanta, where they were more accepting of mixed-race babies. I was getting hit on by all the brothers. They knew I had fucked a black man and they wanted a piece of me. I refused them all until I met James. He at least treated me like a lady, not as a piece of meat. James is a good man. He has helped me pay the bills, raise Jacob, and fulfill my sexual needs, diminished as they are. Losing your husband and having a baby by someone else will do that to you. When Jacob was 1 year old, I got served. I read the papers over and over. My marriage would be officially over. I didn't fight it. I knew Kurt, he would never come back to me. I was destined to a life of single parenthood. After a few years, James started stepping out on me. What could I say though? We weren't married, just living together. It bothered me, but I didn't love him and he didn't love me. It was a relationship of convenience. I said something about him stepping out on me a few times and we would get into a big fight. He would leave and I would call him and beg him to come back. I couldn't stand someone else leaving me. So now Jacob is 5 years old. I love him dearly, but I don't love my life. God took revenge on me for choosing to party instead of going to church, for pulling Kurt away from the church, for lying to my husband, and for cheating. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I know there is a God because he has heaped vengeance upon me. I looked at my downstairs neighbor. She had a look of pity on her face. I don't know what to say. She said, I was hoping to reach you for God, but he has already took. Head you. She said. Then she said, I need to go let the dogs out downstairs. I'm sorry. Then she left me alone to think. Kurt. Monday, a week or so after I had told my story, I got a call from my old pastor. He explained that he knew what happened, but thought I would want to know that Belle had passed away. The funeral was tomorrow. He apologized for the short notice, but he wasn't sure how to get a hold of me. He had just found out that I was working at the Outback in Lincoln. Tuesdays were still my days off, so I booked a flight leaving that night. The service was to be at 11 o'clock with visitation an hour before. I arrived at the church, my old church, my first church, promptly at 10 o'clock. I needed to find out what happened. I had to find a tactful way to ask. Her parents, my ex-in-laws, were standing there as I walked in. They looked at me, the expressions on their faces showed no hate for me. The expressions were sorrowful, but it seemed less for the loss of their daughter than for what could have been. I walked up to them, they greeted me warmly, with tears in their eyes. These people were more of a mother and father to me than my own. They gave me an example of a loving relationship and loving family. A huge contrast from my own parents. Thank you for coming, Kurt. I really wasn't expecting you. How did you hear about it? Pastor John called my restaurant yesterday. What happened? Long story short, Belle and the guy she was living with were out on a second-story back porch arguing. She turned to get away from him, slipped, and fell over the low rail into the backyard. There were 2 pit bulls in the yard and they mauled her to death. Gerald, my ex-father-in-law, told me. He had never been one to pull punches or beat around the bush. I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm really sorry for your loss. I said. Kurt, we're sorry for everything that happened. You didn't deserve that. Shirley, my ex-mother-in-law, said. I'm sorry for how I handled it, but ever since I was a little boy, whenever there were problems at home, I ran. That's how I got so good at cross-country. Maybe if I would have stayed around, things would have turned out differently. We all have to deal with the consequences of our actions, Gerald said. She made her bed, she had to lie in it. Other people started coming into the visitation, so I stepped away and looked at the casket. Of course, it was closed. Many of the people that came were from the church, so I became the focus of their condolences too. They wished I was still around and active in church. When the funeral began, I sat in one of the middle pews. My in-laws were sitting there in the front pew. They had asked if I would sit with them, but I just couldn't. Sitting next to them, I could only assume, was Jacob. He was crying softly. None of my family came, not that I expected them. The only time they had been in a church was at my wedding. When Pastor John asked if anyone wanted to speak, I got up. To all of you that knew Belle, I want to say thank you for coming. She was my Jessie. I was the only one she let call her that. I loved her with all my heart, maybe too much if that is possible. When she wanted to stay in bed on Sunday mornings instead of coming to church, I acquiesced. Perhaps if we had been better church-going Christians, none of our problems would have happened. I looked at Gerald and Shirley, sitting in the pew with Jacob a few feet away. Jacob, a 5-year-old boy, needed comfort but didn't feel he could get it from his grandparents, otherwise he would have been sitting between them. Maybe they couldn't give him the comfort he needed. I went on. I met Jessie in 9th grade. She is the one that brought me to this church. She got me active in regular worship, youth group, and mission trips. It was on one of those trips that I met God. All of you from this church supported me and helped me on my new path. I will never forget that. You took in this lost sheep. I looked at Jacob again. He was a lost sheep. Where would he end up? His biological father was long gone. The guy Jessie was living with didn't want him, he hadn't even shown up for the funeral. I decided then and there that I would take this lost sheep home with me. After all, Jessie and I were still married, technically, when he was born. I went on again. I am part of another flock now, still part of God's family, just in another state. I ask you today to remember Belle for who she was, the girl that grew up in this church. The girl that brought this sinner to God. To all the members of this church, the Thyatira Presbyterian Church, I say remember the good times as we say goodbye to my Jessie Belle.